Everyone wants more money, but most of us weren't taught how to create an abundant life. That's where the law of attraction, manifesting success stories show comes in. If you are ready to have more money, create more freedom, and experience more fun, turn the volume up. It's time to learn how to create the prosperity and life you have been dreaming of. Here's your host, Cassie Parks.
Hello and welcome back to the show. I am your host, Cassie Parks, and I am back with Jill Angie for another interview. Welcome, Jill.
Hi.
Hi. Jill is she is the not your average runner, like goddess, leader, badass, all of it. And she, if you didn't hear last week, my favorite quote of Jill's is, "If you run, you're a runner." It's total LOA. You get to decide who you are, and who you are is also determined by what you do, what actions you're taking, right?
Yes, ma'am.
So last time we talked about, Jill is the first person to take the workshop and commitment and how she's grown and who she's helping. And today she does this amazing workshop. She told you about it at the end of the last show, about becoming a consistent exerciser. And so we're going to talk about that today because I think you can apply a lot of the things that Jill teaches to doing your manifesting work consistently. So tell us, why did you even start this workshop?
Well, I think that I work with runners, pretty much exclusively, but I also recognize that, the women that struggle to meet their running goals, almost always it's because they're struggling with consistency. And I recognize too that just because you're don't want to become a runner doesn't mean that being a consistent exerciser is not something that I'm totally messed up how I said that, but basically women who want to meet their fitness goals, very often they don't meet their fitness goals, whether it is, being able to run a half marathon or doing something else. They often don't meet them because they are struggling with consistency. And I teach consistency in my programs all the time, but I recognize that it's kind of like a discrete skill that if you can master it, you can kind of unlock the universe if you can master the skill of consistency. So I teach the skill of consistency in the context of fitness and exercise, and also, more specifically running, but also just exercise in general. And what I find when I teach this workshop, which did not surprise me at all, is that the women who take it are like, oh, I can apply that skill here and here and here. They're like in work, in my schoolwork, with my kids, right? So it's just a magical life skill to have.
Yes.
I don't know. I think I totally butchered that explanation.
What? You teach it because women need to know, if they're going to be runners and runners with goals, right? Because I think you start, if you run, you're a runner, but what I know about your people is they really like medals. That is
they do.
Yes.
They do.
Yes.
And you know what? You can train for a half marathon and kind of do some of the training runs and then show up on race day and gut your way through it.
Right.
But when you cross that finish line, you're going to feel really uncomfortable, right? You're going to be sore. You might find that you've got an injury developing. But if you're somebody who's mastered the skill of consistency, then you're going to show up regularly for all your training runs. And then race day is going to be so much more fun, right? It's going to be a memory of oh, it's a celebration of all your hard work versus a death march of 13 miles just so you can get a freaking medal.
Yes. I love that. Were you always, and the reason I asked Jill to come talk about this is because, like she just said, it applies over here and over here and over here. And what I know about doing the manifesting work is, when I figured it out, it's pretty much been easy to be consistent every since then, right? When I was committed. And so what I want Jill to do is help those of you, because often if you listen to my podcast, you listen to Manifest It Now with Jenny, both of us, it's this commitment to who we want to become. But I don't think we had to battle a lot to become consistent, like I think some people do. And it's similar to exercise, right? So have you always been able to nail consistency?
No. 100% no. And honestly, there are times that I still struggle with it. And those are the areas in my life where I don't have the results that I want. right? It's like a magic formula. But I do, one thing I've noticed, and because I've, done a lot of studying of, mindset and so forth, I've noticed that the things that I'm consistent with are the things that I don't have a lot of brain drama about. Right. And so when I first started running, I had a lot of brain drama about it, and I really struggled with consistency. And over the years, right, that has sort of settled down. And now I don't really have a problem getting myself out there to run. Now, if I'm training for a marathon and I've got a 20-mile run, like, yes, there will be some brain drama going on. Right. But I don't have like, it's not like, Herculean feat to get myself out the door. But there are other areas in my life where, and strength training has traditionally been one of those things in the past. It's not so much anymore, where I've just been like, I would say to myself, I don't have time. I don't know what to do. I hate it. Right. Like, and when all of those, excuses are like floating around in my mind, guess what? I'm not consistent with strength training. So I think that the thread is that the stuff that we say to ourselves in our brain about the action that we're about to take matters. Yes. And sometimes we don't even recognize that it's an optional thing, right? Like one of the things I teach in my workshop is I don't have enough time is not actually a factual statement, right? It's a story you tell yourself when you are looking for reasons to not do a thing. And when we can recognize that I don't have enough time, or I'm too tired, or I'm not in the mood, when we can recognize that those are just thoughts that we're thinking that we are, kind of using against ourselves, and we come up with sort of rebuttals for those arguments, then suddenly consistency becomes a lot easier.
I love that. Because I think when it comes to manifesting, I opened up Pay at the time that we were having this interview. Pay After You Manifest has been open again for about 4 months. And I will tell you, I haven't done the exact numbers, but I bet you 80% of the people don't do it, right? They say, oh, I want to manifest money. I want to change. Here's this program. This is everything I've been looking for because I can pay after. And what I have found is it doesn't matter pay after, pay before. I have people who pay after are super consistent. I have people who have paid me a lot of money in the past who are not consistent. And, when I look at those numbers, or they made it through 7 assignments, right? Maybe 7 days, maybe 4 days. It's super interesting. And so I would love to give them some help. What are some ways that we become consistent?
So I think one of the, I'm going to answer your question with what is one reason that people do not stick with things? Like one reason that people are inconsistent is because they expect results to come more quickly, or they're mad that they're struggling with something, or mad with something is hard. So, when it comes to running, a lot of my clients will do their first run and they'll be like, well, I was really struggling to breathe. That was really hard, or I was really slow, or I couldn't go very far for very long. I must be bad at running, so I should probably quit. And instead of saying like, oh, I just did my first run, I'll get better from here. So there's that. There's, kind of like expecting yourself to be good at something. But I think with like your manifesting, right? If you give somebody 10 assignments and they only make it to 7, I suspect what they're telling themselves is, oh, it should be working by now, and I don't have my results, so I'm going to quit because this isn't working. When in reality, it might work if they just did the 8th assignment, right? We never really know when the result is going to come. And if you quit early, you may have been like 99%. Right. It's like saying at mile 13 of a half marathon, well, I can't see the finish line because it's around the corner. So I can't see the finish line. I'm never going to get there. I'm just going to sit down and give up. And I think that that's what we do when we discontinue because we think we're not getting results. So I think that that's one reason that people aren't consistent, is that they believe like they should have gotten the result already or whatever. And so how do we flip that around I tell my clients with running, like, you can always run one more mile. You can always run one more, another minute or something like that. Like, just keep going.
Right.
because the results are there. And so it's looking at it differently and not thinking, when you hear yourself say, I should have gotten there by now, I should have my whatever I'm trying to manifest by now. Instead of saying that, you say like, it's just around the corner. I just need to keep going a little bit more.
I love that. And that's so true. And probably is one of the big reasons, like I mentioned in the beginning, one of the reasons I want to have this conversation with Jill is because I haven't come up against a lot of that. And it's probably because since I started like this iteration, my business, I've always been in it for the long game. I'm in it for what I'm creating. I build the skills, but I'm not in it to have $1 million show up tomorrow. I'm in it. I mean, that would be awesome. And I know that it's more likely if I actually do the work and, allow it to happen when it happens versus, deciding it's not going to work in a day.
It's like investing in a retirement plan versus the stock market.
Yes.
Right. Like and although, even the stock market, we probably shouldn't be doing, like, it's like one of those people that like is a day trader in the stock market to make fast money versus somebody who's just like putting money away in their retirement account. And they're like, I'm not going to touch that for another 30 years. And they don't even think about it. They just keep consistently putting money away. And then like, oh, look, I retired and I'm a millionaire. And the person who's like, oh, like that $100 a week or whatever, like isn't going to make enough of a difference. So I'm just going to spend it on something else. They retire and they're like, they got nothing.
Yes. Yes. Which is even, I have a client who's a day trader and she's really, as she's gotten better with her money mindset and creating, what's interesting to me is it's because how we go into it, right? Even as her day trader has a longer term goal, like it isn't for that instant that we normally, that's what I would have always thought, right? But for her, it is that consistency. It's following like what feels good and having sort of this basis, which is exactly what we're talking about.
Yeah.
Is that mindset of it should happen tomorrow. And if it doesn't, I should just quit.
Yes. And I think that's it, right?
Yeah.
And I think we don't even know we're saying that to ourselves, right? It should, and I think this is, it trips up runners. It trips up people who are exercising, because I teach a tool called the minimum baseline. And I actually teach it in this workshop too, which is basically the amount of exercise that you're going to do without any drama in your brain, right? So there's this like threshold in your brain of, you say, all I have to do is 10 minutes. Your brain is like, okay, I'm not going to argue with that. But if you say 15 minutes, the brain is like, oh, no, I'm too tired. I'm like, this isn't going to be fun, right? Like there's a point in your brain where you trip the drama threshold and like all the stuff comes out. And so the minimum baseline is below that. And first thing that happens is all my clients say, all right, well, I'm going to set my minimum baseline for 30 minutes, 5 times a week. And I'm like, all right, are you doing 30 minutes 5 times a week now? They're like, well, no. And I'm like, well, then that's above your drama threshold, right? Like if you're doing it, right? So we set that amount like super, super low. So it seems really easy. And then we're able to build the habit of consistency from there. And so maybe your minimum baseline is 10 minutes of running 3 times a week. But you take that action 3 times a week and like you build the identity of a runner because you're running 3 times a week. And most of the time we go out there and we actually are like, oh, well, 10 minutes, that wasn't enough. I'm going to do more. But it's not about moving your fitness forward. It's about moving your brain forward and your identity forward. And like, that's a really important skill for consistency, is creating the identity of somebody who does this thing consistently.
Yes.
Right. Because when you believe it, then you just do it. Right. Like we all believe that we're people that brush our teeth. Right. Nobody has to argue with themselves every single day. Like, oh my God, not again. Right. Right. We just get up and do it because we have the identity of toothbrushers. This is who we are. Right. So you can create that identity. And when you're a toddler, you don't have that identity. You have to be told and you have to be forced to do it until it becomes a habit. So.
I was just going to say, yes, there are like 4 and 5 year old, like my son, or just a couple, like I have to do it again today and tonight. Like
you're like,
but then you do become that person.
Yeah. Eventually that becomes part of your identity. And so that's what the minimum baseline is all about. It's a really, really powerful tool.
I love that because, applying this to manifesting, it's the same 3 times a week. I say that a lot too. I'll get people to say, okay, what are you going to commit to? and I'm like, don't commit to 7 days. Like that's probably not going to happen. And it's okay. Right.
Yes. Cause we have this like stupid's not a very nice word. We have this erroneous thought in our brain that there's an amount of something that we have to do for it to count, for it to make a difference. And I think that's very flawed thinking because that thought leads us to feel overwhelmed and discouraged, which drives us to quit. Mm-hmm. And if we have the thought that like, this is how much I'm willing to do, and I'm going to do it consistently, then that opens us up to take imperfect and small actions, but over and over and over again. It's like that, what's the name of the book? Atomic Habits by James Clear. He teaches this concept so beautifully, and it's applicable to everything.
I love that. Yeah. I want to ask you this other, because one time you and I had a conversation. I remember we might have been in Italy, and you were like, "Oh, why is this
I love
person
that you can be like, oh, I think we were in Italy. I think we were in Utah. I think like anyway."
I can see it. I think we were, and this was a big aha for me, is that you were like, "Oh, why did this person overtrain and get hurt?" And I was like, I get people like that all the time. They want to do like 100 assignments, and one of our friends was like, she's like, because if you do more, then you're more of it. And I was like, oh, do you find that still in your business? And how does that, because what I find is people that go 100 miles an hour, let's say at the beginning, or they try to like, I'm going to do, 5 hours a day for 3 days, they burn out.
Yeah.
Right. Same as like, people wanting to overtrain. Do you think that is part of what keeps us out of being consistent? Do you think they're tied together? Or is that a separate thing?
Well, I don't know. I think people who overtrain usually do it for one of 3 reasons. One is they're afraid if they skip a day that they'll never start again. Mm-hmm. So they don't have the belief in themselves that this really is a habitual thing. And they're like, if I skip a day, I'll never run again. And so they just try to run 7 days a week and then they get injured. I think the second reason is that people think like more is better, right? Like, just like you said, like, okay, if 10 minutes is good, 20 minutes is better. And they don't like let themselves, come up to speed, so to speak.
Right. Yeah.
And oh gosh, I just forgot the third one. But yeah, it's like the belief that if you skip a day, it's coming from fear, right? If I skip a day, they don't have that trust and they haven't created the commitment. They just think that they're going off of this momentum of doing it every single day. So I think that's a lot of why people overtrain. Oh, and actually the third thing is they just love it so much that they just want to do it all the time. And I mean, I love Cheetos, but I don't eat them every day because it does not feel good in my body. Right. So I think that there's some of that. I don't know if that's what happens with the manifestors.
Yeah. Oh, I think so. I think it's like that. I have to probably, because as you were talking, I wanted to ask you this. It's like, if you've quit something before, then you go almost, I think it's probably certain personality types. I don't think it's everybody, but you come so much harder.
Yeah.
Like, oh, now I'm going to do this. And so you come at it so much harder because you are running off that momentum, and which is probably fueled by that belief that I can't start it again. I can't just do it consistently. I can only like bulldoze through it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then there's like a perfectionist mindset too. Like, if I don't do it perfectly, then I have failed.
Yes.
And I'm all about like the B- work. I feel like
I love it.
Right. Yeah. Like, cause you know what they call like doctors who got like a C average, they call them doctors, right? They don't call them like a C- doctor. They still have MD after their name, and they still treat patients. So I think that, that perfectionist mindset is so the thing that I teach, the other concept that I teach in my workshop is that I think there are 4 different excuse personalities.
Yeah.
And so these are like the way you tend to make your excuses, and perfectionism is one of those. If it's not perfect, it's not worth doing, is sort of like that overarching thought.
Yes.
And I think that folks fall into that when they think I have to do it every day, or I have to do every single exercise perfectly. And then we quit, right? Because then if something doesn't go as expected, we feel defeated and we say, screw it, I'm just going to give up.
Right. Well, and when running and with manifesting, like, oh, I did 4 hours of manifesting work and I didn't get a result.
Yeah.
Like, well, yeah, because you've only given it 4 hours to get that result, you know, they quit.
Yeah.
Same with probably like running. Like, oh, if you just go run for 4 hours, you're probably just going to feel really bad, not want to be better. And you might be worse tomorrow because your body is not going to feel good.
Well, so Andy, my husband, Andy, has been going through this exact same thing. So he ran his first marathon in June, and he'd been a runner for a little under 2 years at that point, and he did great with it. I was really proud of him. And then COVID happened, and so he kind of scaled way back on the running, but he missed doing his really long runs. So like every couple of weeks he'd go out and he'd run like 10 or 12 miles, and then he'd be, hobbling around for a few days. And I said, here's an idea. You could just go. He's like, I just don't have time to like run 10 miles after work. I'm like, how about 3 times a week you run shorter distances, like run 3 miles after work? I'm like, how long does it take you to run three miles? He's like, 25 minutes. I'm like, all right, do you have 25 minutes when you're done with work? He's like, yeah, I do. I'm like, okay, well, let's do that. And then on the weekends, your long runs are going to feel a lot better. And lo and behold, I was right. It's almost like I'm a running coach. But he's actually finding that like, he's getting faster and he just feels so much better because instead of like trying to cram it all into one big session, he's spreading it out and like creating that consistency. It's very powerful.
It is. So talk to us about, you mentioned this on the last episode, commitment and consistency.
Yeah. So I mean, consistency is the act of, it's the practice of taking an action repeatedly over and over again. But I think commitment is the decision that you make that underpins the consistency, right? If you're not committed to taking the action, if you haven't said to yourself, I'm going to make this work no matter what, then you're not going to be consistent. You're always going to believe your excuses. So I think commitment is the decision and consistency is the action.
Do you think it's as simple as saying, I'm going to make this, whatever this is, whether it's manifesting 10K, it's becoming a runner, it's exercise. Do you think it just happens in that moment, or is there a process or thoughts you have to change to get to that commitment?
I think for some people, they just decide I'm going to be a runner and then boom. Yeah. Right. They're a runner. I think for most of us, it's a process. Most of my clients come to me and they're like, well, this is the 3rd time I've tried to be a runner. I'm like, all right, it's okay. This is right. Like, It doesn't matter how many times you try, you learn, and then you learn, you apply, and then you come back around. So I think when you hit that magical point of the commitment is solid and you have a plan for consistency, then those two work together to give you the result you want. And if you haven't achieved it yet, it doesn't mean that you're doing it wrong. It doesn't mean there's anything wrong with you. It means you just haven't gotten to that place. And I think sometimes it takes multiple quits for us to recognize, okay, I don't want to quit on this anymore. Right. And then the commitment comes in and then you're like, all right, now the consistency follows.
I love that. Do you think, what are your keys to consistency? Do you think it's just knowing you're going to be consistent, or do you think it's deciding up front, like you said, 10 minutes, 3 times a week, and knowing exactly what you're going to do?
Yeah. I think like deciding what is the minimum that I'm willing to commit to, and recognizing that might be less than the amount that's going to ultimately serve you long-term, but that the minimum you're committing to is to create the mindset where consistency can flourish versus moving your fitness forward or moving your manifesting forward or whatever. Because really the mindset, if you don't have that mindset, that commitment ahead of time, none of it is going to work. Right. And so I think dialing in, committing to something that, I don't like using the word realistic because I believe in like dreaming in really big, crazy dreams, but like meeting yourself where you're at and recognizing like, okay, I think I should be doing manifesting work for an hour a day, 7 days a week, but then like looking at your schedule and saying, oh, I can't fit that in, so I'm not going to do it. It's like, like you said, how many days a week are you willing to do? And what's the minimum amount you're willing to do? That like making the commitment to doing less in service of ultimately doing more, I think is the secret.
I 100% agree. I'm gonna say it again. Like the commitment to doing less in service of doing more, right?
Yeah.
That's amazing.
It's patience is what it is. It's like being willing to be patient with your results. I was also thinking when you mentioned that, you have people that want to sit down and like do 4 hours of manifesting work and then have their result. And like 4 hours of manifesting work is, it's a chunk of time and so forth. But because I think this happens with my runners too. If the mindset that you have when you're doing that work is, I'm going to do this work so I can get my result, you're not going to get your result because you're like doing it out of fear.
Right.
And that, then you're just going to be, you're like banging your head against the wall. You're never going to get what you want if your commitment, if the reason you're making the commitment is because you just, think like, oh, this is what I need to do to get what I want. And you're not open to what you want showing up in many different ways.
Yes. That's so true. I love that. And it is, it's that I'm going to make it happen instead of I'm going to learn how to let it happen.
Yeah.
Amazing.
Yeah. My runners struggle with that too. They're like, maybe that is why some people overtrain as well, as they're like trying to force it to happen instead of like, I always tell people, I'm like, rest is a training day.
I love that you say that. Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
It's like that rest day is just as much an important part of your training plan as the 10-mile run. Right.
Yes.
And if you don't take those rest days, your 10-mile runs are not going to be as effective.
I love that. Say that again. So if you're a runner, this applies to manifesting too. If you don't take your rest day, your 10 miles aren't going to be as effective.
Yeah.
It's the same with manifesting and doing whatever the assignment is. There's rest days built into Manifest 10K. If you don't take that break to give that space, the other stuff that comes after it isn't as effective.
Yeah. Like the rest day is when your body sort of absorbs the training and gets stronger. I feel like the rest day for manifesting is when your brain starts adapting to the changes you're trying to make.
Yes. I totally agree. Thank you for saying that like that, because it's true. Amazing. Anything else you want to say about consistency or commitment and how to become both of those?
I think it's a practice, right? Like it's first time out the gate. Most people fail at commitment and consistency. And honestly, I still fail at it on a regular basis. And I think because I'm just like, oh, look, I messed that up. I wonder how I can like shift my thinking so that I can become more consistent or, like I quit on things all the time. And then I have to question like, well, how badly do I want this? And then I have to reframe my thinking. So it's not like there's this magical switch in your brain.
Right. You have to learn it over and over and over.
You just keep practicing and getting better at it. And I feel like that's just how life works.
I agree. And if we just surrender to that, like we get there a lot quicker, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, it's amazing. I think that's the same with because even if I get quote unquote inconsistent in my work, I recognize it like, oh, I don't feel great. Oh, you let it go a couple too many days. And I just don't have that brain drama because I'm like, oh, just pick it up and do it again. Right. But I've trained myself to do that.
Yeah. But I really it's such a neutral way to look at it. Like, oh, I don't feel so good. Oh, well, it's because I haven't done this. All right. I'll just start doing that again. Like if you're punching yourself in the face, you don't say like, oh my God, my face hurts. Like, this is awful. You say, oh, I'm punching myself in the face. Well, I better stop that. Right. Like, we don't have a bunch of drama. So I think that like making things as neutral as possible and just recognizing like, oh, that's a thing I did. I can change it and move forward is very powerful instead of beating ourselves up over it.
I agree. All right. So if people are like, this is amazing, she seems like she can teach me all of this consistency. I know you have a class coming up. How do people get into that?
So you can just go to my website, notyouraverage.runner.com. And if you click on the menu, there's a little tab that says workshop. And that is how you sign up for the How to Become a Consistent Exerciser workshop, which is happening at the end of August.
Yay, that's amazing. And where else can people find you? You also have a podcast for those of you that love podcasts.
I do. I have a podcast called Not Your Average Runner. It does have an explicit warning, so maybe don't listen to it in front of the kiddos. I always like to warn people about that. I think I forgot to warn them on the last episode. And you can find me on Instagram, Not Your Average Runner, on Facebook, Not Your Average Runner. Yeah, it's pretty consistent with my naming.
I love it. Amazing. Well, thank you so much for being here today and sharing this such valuable information, whether someone's going to apply it to exercise or to manifesting. It is huge. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you all. Come back next time.
Thank you for joining us on the Law of Attraction Manifesting Success Stories show. To learn how to attract more money into your life, go to your favorite book retailer and order Cassie's book, Manifest $10,000.